Gaza-related angle. Earlier this year, it was reported that the U.S. and Israel have explored Somaliland as a potential destination for displaced Palestinians from Gaza.
And bingo, that is why we've been hearing so much about Somalian fraud in Minnesota. It seems to be all coordinated. Happy New Year, everybody. Today is the first day of 2026, and we are actually going to dig into the most viral story that ended 2025, the alleged Somali daycare fraud in Minnesota exposed by YouTube journalist Nick Shirley. Let's take a listen.
Here in Minnesota, massive fraud is taking place within the government and the Somali population. Here, this building alone, Quality Learning Center, is a daycare, yet they spelled learning wrong. And they said leering. This daycare alone in 2025 has received $1.9 million from the government. And the strange things about these childcare centers is there's no one here right now. It's midday on a weekday. If you were to try to go inside, it's completely closed and the windows are all blacked out. No one's working. Midday. Children should be in here. And this place is licensed for 99 children. And this is the outside. There's no windows, no nothing. And like I said, they literally spelled the word wrong on their sign. This is open and blatant fraud taking place here inside of Minnesota. The government is complicit with this, and this is just one of the hundreds of child daycare centers here inside of Minneapolis being ran by the Somali population.
That's right. According to Nick Shirley, the Somali population in Minnesota is up to no good. According to Shirley and his team, they uncovered $110 million of fraud in one day, all from these alleged Somali-run fake daycare centers. Now, normally I'd be like, hell yeah, discovering fraud, taking down, exposing fraudulent waste and abuse. I'm all about that. But there's something weird and bizarre that's going on here. I think there's potentially a problem, and it's triggered by the fact that the highest levels of government already knew about this fraud because it had already been reported weeks before by the U.S. attorney that fraud in Minnesota exceeded $9 billion. $9 billion, that's a whole lot of fraud compared to, what was it? Nick Shirley talked about $110 million, $9 billion. We're talking about a small fraction, but focusing specifically on the Somali community. And then you have the amplification of this story, which isn't necessarily organic. So you have to kind of wonder why this story is getting so much airplay if it's just a small fraction of that $9 billion fraud, right? You have people like Elon Musk, Vice President J.D. Vance, Attorney General Bam Bondi, all amplifying this story that's centered around specifically the Somali community. I'm not discounting that the fraud exists within the Somali community, but is the focus, is the amplification making us feel a certain way or trying to make us feel a certain way about the Somali community? That's the question. Because Shirley's video, mega viral, 134 million views on X alone. Once again, why are they so focused on fraud in this particular community? And another question that I found information for that is very, very interesting is, where did this information even come from in the first place?
So Israeli reporters are now claiming that Mossad is solely responsible for uncovering the Somalian fraud cases in Minnesota.
How is Israeli Mossad related to the recent corruption that was discovered in Minnesota? You're not going to believe it. There actually is a substantial connection, and it runs through the Israeli Prime Minister office. I'll start from the end. Israel just established relationships with Somaliland, which is not Somalia. But the backstory to the whole Minnesota corruption story is that much of those funds, and again, I think the initial number that came out is about $9 billion. Again, this is crazy. American taxpayer money of, let's say, $50 billion that they imagine were stolen or misdiverted from public funds. About $9 billion of those were sent back to support terrorism, or what they would call the Muslim Brotherhood actions, and this is tied into Qatar. And Israel, of course, was behind the scenes, and I know people love these conspiracies, in leaking some of the information that is responsible or related to the funding of terrorism using that exact money. So the fact that Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu has a phone call and recognizes Somaliland is tied into Qatar being a supporter of the Muslim Brotherhood, tied into the Somali funds that were stolen in Minnesota funding terrorism in the Middle East. That is the story that came out right now. It really blows my mind how global terrorism works. And it's such an amazing thing that it was uncovered, and I'm sure there's more news to come on this topic.
Okay, so evidently this is not a story just about domestic fraud. This is a story that the Israeli Mossad has now given us that has unveiled to us this international terrorist operation that is unfolding before our eyes. They tell us that federal counterterrorism sources confirm that millions of dollars in stolen funds have been sent back to Somalia, where they ultimately landed in the hands of the terror group Al-Shabaab. As one confidential source puts it, the largest funder of Al-Shabaab is the Minnesota taxpayer. Is that information true? I don't know. But the one thing that I do know for sure, that the timing of this story becoming such a huge mega viral story is quite apropos, considering what that Israeli reporter was talking about, and how Israel just became the first country to recognize Somaliland. And what does that mean? Let's take a listen.
Does anyone know what Somaliland is, really? Said U.S. President Donald Trump after Israel became the first country in the world to recognize the self-proclaimed republic in Eastern Africa. Somaliland is a small territory in the Horn of Africa that broke off from Somalia in 1991. It has its own government and elections and has been largely stable, but until now, no country has officially recognized it except for Taiwan, which is an unrecognized country itself. Over 20 countries criticized Israel's recognition of Somaliland. So why does Somaliland even matter? It sits on the Gulf of Aden, one of the world's most important shipping routes, home to U.S., Chinese, and European military bases, and across from Yemen. That matters even more now. Since the Gaza war began on Hamas's October 7 attack, the Iran-backed Houthis in Yemen have fired hundreds of missiles and drones at Israel and attacked shipping in the Red Sea, prompting Israeli airstrikes in Yemen. That has raised the strategic value of Somaliland's coastline. There's also a Gaza-related angle. Earlier this year, it was reported that the U.S. and Israel have explored Somaliland as a potential destination for displaced Palestinians from Gaza.
And bingo, that is why we've been hearing so much about Somalian fraud in Minnesota. It seems to be all coordinated. You know, if you're thinking, why is everybody talking about these daycare centers that are run by Somalis in Minnesota? Well, it could be that the powers that be have inserted that story into our algorithms because it has certain geopolitical implications for them that have nothing to do with their domestic interests. Specifically, by focusing in on a story that essentially paints Somalis as bad people, the idea here, I think, could be that it will weaken Somalia's image amongst Americans and other Westerners and make it easier to support the split of this other newly created nation of Somaliland, a nation, by the way, that only Israel recognizes. Now, according to Somali intelligence, Somaliland has accepted 3 Israeli conditions in exchange for Israeli recognition. One is the resettlement of Palestinians, 2, the establishment of an Israeli military base on the coast of the Gulf of Aden, and Somaliland joining the Abraham Accords. Well, isn't that a lovely and convenient development for the state of Israel, that they get somewhere to dump the Palestinians? They also gain a critical and strategic military base, and they create an ally in the region that did not exist before. But of course, they would ideally like to get the U.S. on board as well, including the American people, who have been very quickly turning on Israel. So maybe they get a resident independent journalist who maybe isn't so independent, if you read what this story is all about, to do a story that says Somalians bad. I'm not saying fraud isn't happening here, but you should probably think about who is going to benefit from this story. This, I think, is a great thread from Sir Escanor that highlights some of these very interesting things about Nick Shirley, right? First thing, he's Latter-day Saints, okay? Not that there's anything wrong with the Mormon community, but we do know for a fact that the intelligence communities really like recruiting from LDS. So that's one data point. And he also makes the interesting point that Nick Shirley's journalism seems to be a, quote, guided tour of pressure points in the system, right? He's somehow at the White House roundtable on Antifa, meeting with Trump. He's at all these anti-Trump protests. He gets mobbed by protesters. He's at an Antifa rally. He's at the Chicago ICE protests.
He also is at those meetings with people like Jack Posobiec.
He's at anti-Islam protests. He's at the U.S.-Mexican border documenting the quote-unquote crisis. He's somehow also the first American to be allowed to film inside of the El Salvador CCOT prison. So on and so forth, right? If it happens that a quote-unquote neutral interviewer who just happens to hit every friction point that drives the same agenda, surveillance, borders, prisons, predictive policing, and permanent emergency politics, is that just a coincidence, or is there some coordination happening here? He ends with a couple of interesting questions, right? Who is funding Nick Shirley's travels? Who's coordinating all this access that normal people do not have? And also, who is benefiting from all of this polarization? That last question should be a big focus, because you should ask yourself, is the Nick Shirley piece about creating unity against fraud, or is it about creating animosity against the Somalian population for whatever reason? The last thing I'll say is that this should be a huge lesson in media literacy, because it was for me, because when I first heard the story, I was like, yes, exposing fraud, uncovering fraud, love it. But the more I saw, the more things just didn't look quite right, that this didn't look like independent journalism, because that's what I do. And there seems to be something in here that is unorganic, if I may. And there could be something much more insidious that is going on. But hey, that's just what I think. Let me know what your thoughts are in the comment section below. Do you think there's something more to this story beyond just
opinions count? Research counts. So, yeah. So this is going to be a little bit off the cuff, but I think it's important to kind of go with what we've just listened to. And let's just do a little background on Nick, shall we? He was raised in Utah, which we all know is a CIA hotbed, member of the LDS, also a CIA hotbed for recruitment. Not saying that he is, that's just a fact that area is known for that, especially with this Charlie Kirk case, letting us know that that's a true fact all over Utah. It's just a thing. He attended Farmington High School in Farmington, Utah, graduated in 2020. He began his YouTube in high school when he was 16, doing pranks and just busting in on celeb weddings and just things like that. He decided to take off and in 2021 and participated in a religious mission in Chile for 2 years with the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And he returned late 2023 producing political commentary only. Since then, probably most likely being pushed by his mother, who also has a TikTok, who does political commentary and social media influencing with 250,000 followers, and she goes by the handle of Brooker T. Jones for whatever reason. So, that's kind of odd. And, feeding him things to say and things to do. Maybe that's how he's getting in these rooms with these people. I don't know. but it is a little weird that all of a sudden something we already knew was happening is like blowing up so big, and we all already kind of knew what was going on. It's called Little Somalia for a reason. So that video helped us understand a little bit more about the actual things going on behind the scenes with this. So, you know, 2024, Nick Shirley paid a number of Hispanic men to stand outside of the White House holding pro Biden signs and pro immigration signs, despite being a pro Trump supporter. Quite obviously, very supportive of MAGA. His mom seems to be the same way. So it seems like he got into the room with President Trump on that round table with Jack Posobiec and a few other influencers. I'm sure we all remember that, to talk about Antifa and how terrible their protests outside ICE buildings were, which some things they did were really, really terrible. That's obvious. But for the most part, unlike BLM, it was pretty tame, you know? Yeah, they play crazy music and act idiots, but they weren't killing or hurting people or much of that, which it was reported as something totally different. But if you go back and watch the videos, it's not as deep as people think or say it is or pretend it is, whatever you want to call it. Nick Shirley has a net worth of $500,000. He has 1.1 million subs, more than 200 million total views, and that's as of January 2026, which I thought was very interesting because he also, in late 2025, launched a creator coin by the $, the Nick Shirley. On the base network, it fluctuated wildly, hitting 9 million at its peak, dropping back down to 3 million, reported earning about 41,600 to 65,000 in creator royalties from the initial trading. So, also with this new video that is just blown up, going viral, everyone on YouTube is reporting on this crazy fraud that no one knew about. So he's definitely probably raked in a lot of ad revenues and things like that, making a whole butt ton of money off of this stuff, which is fine if you're doing it for the right reasons, and I pray that he is. It just seems there's a lot of fraud going on in his family because his mom and dad were also involved in a civil bankruptcy suit in 2018, and the Fed in 2021, the Fed court settlement of $20,000 had to be paid into regards of the company they defrauded, involving allegations of avoidable and improper financial transfers. So that's related to Thrive National Corp. I haven't really looked into that, but that's what it's in relation to. So her sister, Brooke, his mom's sister, Nick Shirley's mom, Brooke Shirley, sister, whose name is Amy Hall, also recently was sentenced to 3 years, 1 month in prison for wire fraud. In July of 24 is when the sentence came down. She was defrauding her employer. She used her accountant position to access company bank accounts and company credit cards to do things like go out to eat, go shopping, pay some utility bills. She also took a vacation to Aruba, and it equaled $262,897.69, which is quite a hefty amount for us normal people. Anyways, it's like a year's salary. Some people 2 or 3 years salaries, maybe 4 even at this point. So, a big deal when you're exposing all this fraud that no one knows about yet, which I thought everyone knew about this it's not a secret. It was reported on previously of a much higher number than what he saw. Yeah, he went and checked out the locations, and that's appreciated because not everyone has the ability to do that. So, how is all of this being funded? I mean, he doesn't really state what his expenses are and all those types of things. So, I don't know. It's just kind of fishy. His dad was a former NBA player between 2002 and 2005 for the Phoenix Suns, Chicago Bulls, and Atlanta Hawks in the United States, and also in Spain, Russia, and Greece. So he authored 6 books, wrote columns for ESPN.com, founder of The Process, which is a service helping knowledge workers build productive habits and find community. So it's interesting to me because I tried to go into family and I can't even find the grandparents' names. All I could find were their nicknames. And the grandpa is Grandpa Shirley, and he is 90 and lives on a 100-acre farm with, I don't know, like 40 cows or 50 cows or something like that. Um, in Iowa, and the grandma, known as Grandma Savage, died between the ages of 75 and 80 in August of 2025. Like, how do you not know when she died? I don't know. And it also says when I look up the dad that he was born, there's like a 10-year gap of when he could have been born. Why are all these things so secretive? They should be very easy to find. They are on everyone else. His Nick Shirley's Wikipedia page says nothing about family or anything like that. It just pretty much talks about this recent video that he did and, you know, a couple of other things, how he got his thing started in his, you know, youth at 16 doing these, you know, stunts, I guess you could say, or pranks, stunts, whatever, friendly pranks and stunts, crashing weddings of celebrities and things like that. So I just find it very, very strange that you cannot find anything on his family. The lack of family history, coupled with a 23-year-old sitting in rooms with the president, the vice president, other investigative reporters, if that's what you're wanting to call him at this point, you know, which I was convinced and now I'm questioning. So, you know, hey, that's what we're allowed to do. So, Cash Honey Patel also knew about this before it was reported on, yet he, Elon Musk, Vice President Vance are all pushing this story that he's done. Why? And it seems like this previous video that we just watched kind of explains that. So maybe people who are better at genealogical things could maybe jump in here, I don't know, and help this, because now I'm really curious. My curiosity is piqued. How at 23 do you get in these rooms? How at 23 do you get the first to be the first American to be able to go film inside of CCOT? How are you getting access to all of these things without help? And it just seems odd that none of the family members can be found or named or anything. It's odd. I mean, it's just odd. So, I don't know. Just something to think about. Have a blessed day.